Randy Pausch said that one thing that makes it possible to be an optimist is if you have a contingency plan in place when all hell breaks loose. There's a lot of things I don't worry about because I have a plan in place if they do. This is basically encapsulated in an idea in psychology called implementation intentions. It's a simple idea, but it's how you can stop self-sabotaging. Every time you self-sabotage, it's because you step into a condition or an environment that then triggers you back into the habits of your former self. And it triggers you to acting impulsively and with emotion rather than with desire towards your future self. Let me give you an example. Every time I go home, it seems like I then immediately start craving junk food. It's like I step into that environment and all of a sudden I just want to start eating bad food. And there is a lot of unhealthy food in that environment versus where I'm here right now at my work. I don't have any bad food at this environment. So it's very easy for me to eat clean and eat healthy for the first half of my day because I don't put any negative inputs in that environment. But when I go home, there's a little bit of different rules in that environment. You know, my wife's got 6 kids. It's actually, they eat a lot of good healthy foods, but there's a lot of food there that goes against how I would fully desire to eat. And so often when I go home, I'm triggered to eat a lot of bad food, and often I do. Well, going back to implementation intentions and going back to Randy Pausch's quote from the beginning, it's possible to be an optimist if you have a contingency plan in place for when all hell breaks loose. So what implementation intentions really means is you pre-plan for failures. You pre-plan the conditions when you know you're going to self-sabotage. So for example, I know that when I go home, I'm going to get triggered because your triggers and your identity often come from environments. That's why you're a different person in different situations. When you're around certain people, you get triggered to act a certain way. When you're in certain environments, you get triggered to act a certain way. And so I already know that when I go home, I'm triggered to eat bad food. I'm kind of already tired because I've woken up early, I've worked hard, I'm mentally fatigued, I'm physically fatigued. And so I go home and, you know, in that environment, I just want to chill out. Well, you want a contingency plan. You want a failure safe plan, and that's where implementation intentions comes. And what you do with that is you say, if X, then Y. If I go home and I'm triggered, then what? You want a pre-planned condition. You want a pre-planned response. And so you want to plan for when you're going to be triggered to self-sabotage. So recently I've got this really good whole food, like superfood protein shake. And so now whenever I go home, as soon as I go home, I just drink that protein shake and boom, the craving for bad food goes away because I've planned for failure. And so it's like when I go home, then I'm going to just drink that protein shake. When I'm triggered to eat junk food, I'm going to go and do 5 push-ups or something. BJ Fogg in his book, Tiny Habits, actually calls this having a tiny habit formula or a tiny habit recipe. Basically, you attach a new habit to a habit you already have. So it's like if you want to floss your teeth, well, you know you already brush, so you might as well just put the floss right next to the brush and attach or stack the habit onto one that already exists. It's hard to start a new habit off of nothing. It's a lot easier to attach a habit to a routine you already have in place. So I know I walk home. I know I step in that door and then I get triggered and I'm hungry. And so I've just attached a new habit to that, which is immediately go and drink this amazing health shake. And what's amazing is once you actually follow through on your failure plan. So for me, it's a failure plan. I step in, I go home, and I drink my amazing protein shake. And because I watched myself use proactive behavior rather than reactive behavior, me getting triggered and eating a bunch of junk food when I get home is reactive to basically a goal-conflicting environment. But when I go into that environment, and by goal-conflicting, I'm only talking purely about my health. Every other aspect of that environment is very generated towards my future self. But there's just certain foods that my wife and kids eat that don't align with my health goals. But now I've put the failure planning in place, so I'm not relying on willpower. I'm actually just relying on being intentional, having a plan, and following through with that plan. And what happens when you follow through with your plans? What happens when you follow through with your own commitments? You build confidence, you build self-trust. And so every time I go home and I drink that protein shake, I now have more confidence than I did before because I'm actually living intentionally. I'm living with honesty, self-honesty. And so self-honesty and self-commitment leads to a desire to make bigger commitments towards your future self. It allows you to actually create bigger and better commitments towards your future self. So that's the practical implementation intention, is just having a failure plan in place, attaching a positive habit to a routine you already have in place. The second one is every time you win, actually celebrate. That's another thing that he talks about, is that positive emotions actually create habits. And so if you celebrate the fact that you succeeded, and you build confidence, you also want to identify as your future self. Identify as someone who actually succeeds, who follows through, who keeps their commitments. And so your identity becomes more and more reinforced as someone who eats healthy, as someone who doesn't just get reactive to your triggers. So your identity changes towards your future self. And your behavior comes from, yes, your environment. It's triggered by your environment, but it's primarily driven by your identity and your identity within an environment, your identity within a context. And so if you go home and you start being someone better, for me, often I go home, and because I then start binging on bad food, then I have this like internal conflict. It's called cognitive dissonance in psychology. And so then that lower confidence bleeds through in my relationship with my kids. So if I just go home and actually be who I want to be my future self now, actually follow through with my own goals rather than being reactive to a situation, then I can have way more confidence, and I'm reinforcing a much better identity in that environment. And then I can actually be more aware, more mindful of my own kids rather than being caught up in my own frustration. So if you are constantly self-sabotaging, you're probably not being that present towards those you love because you're so in this state of internal conflict, internal regret, cognitive dissonance. And so you just got to put a plan in place and then follow through with that. And eventually the plan then becomes the pattern. It becomes the habit it's like when I go home, I don't just walk through the door, I go and get a shake and I just drink something good because I know I'm hungry. So that is now part of the routine. And so you can extend a routine or you can stack habits. That's how it's done. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Hope this helps you become your desired future self. Down below, you can get access to my free 30-day Future Self course. And this video was edited by The Draw Shop. Have an amazing day.